Hey guys, welcome to Legacy Minutes for March 20th, 2020. It has been a long, crazy week, I'm sure for you as well. COVID-19, coronavirus is sweeping the globe, peaking in some areas, seems to be going down in others. I'm praying that the Lord would just miraculously do a work, and yet I know that He is at work, and He is at work in the midst of everything that's going on. Personally, I work for a company where we do websites and technology for churches, and as you can imagine, the church is really scrambling to make sure that they are able to serve their people well through this time, this unknown amount of time that the church will be scattered. And you know, as I think about that, and as I look at how this has affected my own family, this is really an opportunity for us as followers of Christ to dig deep into what it means to be a Christian, what it means to live a life under the authority of the government when they say, hey, it's time for you to lock down, but also under the authority of God, even higher, when He says to love your enemy, to love your neighbor, to love the people around you. You know, I think about this virus, and while in my area there's really not a lot of cases going around, I at the same time look at it and say I don't want to be the link in the chain that allows this thing to go and continue on. And so, you know, I kind of take the stance that Martin Luther took back when the Black Plague was sweeping the world. And he kind of stepped back, and I'm paraphrasing, but he kind of stepped back and said, you know, I don't want to be the one who goes and gets sick and then passes this on to everyone else. And at the same time, I don't want to be the one who is so afraid of what's going on that I hang back and I'm not willing to help out my brother and sister in Christ. I'm not willing to fulfill my Christian duty. And he kind of ends it by saying, listen, my faith is neither cowardly nor foolhardy. And I love that, right? We're not called to be fools, and we're not called to be cowards. We're called to be wise, to look around, to take in what's going on, and to act in a wise, honorable way that glorifies God. So tonight, that was a big intro, but tonight I want to talk a little bit more about identity. And I really want to get back into a rhythm of doing 3 or 4 of these videos a week and really talking about identity. I hope you'll join me. But tonight I want to talk about what it means to be called as a man of dominion. What does it mean that God has called us to have dominion? So let's look at Genesis chapter 1, and let's start in verse 26. It says, then God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over the livestock, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. So God created man in His own image. In the image of God, He created them, male and female, He created them. And God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heaven, and over every living thing that moves on the earth. And so as we look at this, I want to talk about dominion from sort of 2 different aspects. As we read these verses, we see that God, before man was created, had this conversation within the Godhead. The Trinity got together and they said, let us make man in our own image, in our own likeness. And then He said this, let them have dominion. In verse 26, let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the heavens, over the livestock, over all the earth, over every creeping thing. So before man was even on the earth, God had assigned to him dominion. God said, let him have it. He created man with the gift and responsibility of dominion. When I think about dominion, I don't think about myself. When I think about what someone with dominion looks like, you know, I think of a king. I think of a guy like in the Bible, Nebuchadnezzar, a guy like Pharaoh. I think of the dynasties of China. I think of these great empires, the Roman Empire, of course, that ruled these large and vast chunks of the earth. I think about that when I think of dominion. People whose influence changed the lives of those around them, who were able to, because of their power and the sheer will that they had, they were able to really shape their own lives and legacies. And yet the reality is that God has called you and me to be people of dominion. He has not just called it, he's given it to us. He's given us the gift of dominion. Before we were ever created, God was laying out his plan for us to rule, and to rule like he does, to rule lovingly, to rule wisely, to look at the world around us, not as something to crush under our thumb, but something that we would nurture and care for. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more in the weeks to come. But God gifted us with dominion, and dominion comes with responsibility. Dominion comes with the responsibility to care for, to nurture, to raise up. And so what you see is man from the very beginning begins to shape the world around him because of his dominion. He begins to build cities. God put Adam and Eve in the garden. He built this beautiful place around them. And then when they went out, they wanted to keep making things beautiful like what God gave them in the garden. They wanted to shape the world around them. That's the call to dominion. But the reality is that, as Paul says in Romans chapter 1, the tendency of man is that we bow down to creation. Instead of us having dominion and having sovereignty and ruling over creation the way God has called us to, we tend to bow down. We tend to look at things in creation and worship them, whether that be the things that we can get, the money that we can have, the gold, back in the old days, the gold that we could collect and coat everything with. Maybe that's sexually. We tend to worship the sexual nature, because at the end of the day, man is sort of that pinnacle of creation. And so if we're going to worship creation, ultimately we're going to end up worshiping man. And we see that all over the place today. It's funny that we're talking about dominion in a time where right now, many people are seriously afraid of what creation's trying to do with them. This virus is going out and it's infecting hundreds of thousands of people, and it's killing, at this point, tens of thousands of people. If some of the people who are making predictions are right, maybe it kills millions of people. I pray that that's not where it goes. But this part of creation is trying to rule over man, and yet, what's our tendency? We look at it and we go, okay, how do we defeat this thing? How do we take something that 100 years ago we didn't even know exists? Now we know it exists. How do we control it? How do we defeat it? Because we have this thing in us that's built to take dominion. God has given us dominion, and he's called us to exercise dominion. He's called us to seek it out. He's called us to take it. We don't need to bow down to creation, as Paul tells us our tendency is, especially if we are believers in Jesus Christ. If we are believers in Jesus Christ, the Bible tells us that we've been set free from the bonds that cause us to worship false gods and false idols, the bonds that cause us to bow down and choose to live a life of subservienthood to creation. We have been called to rise above and take the place as men that God has called us to, the place of dominion, of loving, benevolent rule over the creation that God has given us. So, men, that's really what I want to challenge you to tonight, to look at those verses in Genesis, to look at the first couple of chapters of Genesis and really say, God, who have you called me to be? What have you called me to do? How have you called me to live? Because if we want to be men of legacy, we have to go all the way back to the beginning to see who God has called us to be, to recognize what God designed for man, to see our lives now through the light of what Christ has done for us, so that we can now walk in a manner worthy of the Lord. That's what the book of Colossians says. It's what it says in 1 Thessalonians. This is what Paul is calling believers to do. Walk in a manner worthy of the Lord. Walk in the manner that God designed you to walk. And men, part of that is to be men who lovingly, wisely take dominion. So will you read Genesis 1 and 2 and just begin to think about what that means. There's questions at the bottom of this post on Facebook and on Instagram. Will you read through those questions and ponder them and think about them? Because God is calling you to more than you are today. Even if you've been a faithful Christian for many, many years, God is still calling you deeper. He's still calling you further in. It reminds me of that those chapters in, or the pages in C.S. Lewis's book, The Last Battle, in the Chronicles of Narnia series, and the lion just keeps calling to people further up and further in, further up and further in, and that is how God is calling us to follow him, further up and further in. We're never going to be there, but we need to keep pursuing. And tonight, I'm just reminding you the dominion that God has called us to have dominion over creation. He's called us to be those who rule over, who craft and shape the world around us in such a way that he would be glorified and that he would be honored. So, men, that's my challenge to you. Praying for you, especially during these times as the world is kind of going a little crazy, as there's so much fear going on. I'm praying for you. I would ask that you would pray for me, pray for my family, pray for the city that we're in, pray for the city that you're in. Men, let's be men who are on our knees, who are really, taking that idea of what God's called us to be and running forward with it. Love you. Till next time, God bless.